Good afternoon, everybody. It's Friday and the 19th of January. You're here at Lunch and Learn. Today we have a guest speaker, Dr. Robert Turner, goes by Rusty. Rusty's been with us before, and he, as a neurologist, has done some previous talks that are on the New Mind YouTube channel with, working with seizures and all that. But this past year, he and Dave Cantor did a very interesting workshop about neurotoxins and environmental wireless radiation factors that are toxic to our systems. And it was just one of the most impressive things I saw. And so we wanted to have him here with us today. So I'm not going to be doing a long intro. You know Rusty Turner from previous workshops. You can go read about him online. But Rusty, it's all yours. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy guy. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Rob and Richard and Aaron. See some nice familiar names on the attendees. So hi to everybody from, at least today, sunny Charleston, South Carolina. So if you noticed Rob's announcement, which I sent to him initially, I changed the title. What we talk about a lot more, what I do a lot more work with, is electromagnetic radiation, sometimes described as radio frequency radiation, electromagnetic frequencies, all terms which immediately put people into I'm back in my science class in high school and I'm going to go to sleep. So this is all about really wireless radiation, not just wireless, but everything we deal with is radiation. And so how do we conceptualize that? So I call this the impact on brain, body, and behavior. And what I firmly believe increasingly as we continue to work with various organizations, research and scientific around the world, is it is the hidden factor in many of the illnesses, illnesses and chronic diseases that we face in our practices every day. And the simplistic analogy, if somebody comes to see their healthcare provider because they keep having shortness of breath and a cough, and they do an EEG or a chest X-ray and it looks normal, they tell them, well, you're fine, regardless of the fact that they're smoking 3 packs a day or something like that. We have to look at the big picture. So this is mostly an awareness. I'm going to try to get through the slides. Rob, you'll be pleased to know there's a whole lot less slides than and Dave did during the workshop. And so I've tried to simplify it. Hopefully, if you see the next slide, disclosures, there's no disclosures that I have, financial or commercial interests. And I'll talk about these other environmental health trusts and some of these other things a little bit later as far as resources. I want to use this pretty much as an awareness of what I think is very significant. We will talk some about EEG, and I see more and more EEG findings related to electromagnetic so-called pollution or artificial wireless radiation. And it's not just cell phones. There's a much bigger picture that's happening. So I'll do the 3 S's. We're going to talk about the sources, the symptoms, and some solutions. And keeping with the S's, the 3 parts of this initial part will be saturation. We are living in an increasingly electromagnetic radioactive fishbowl, and that's not going to change, and it's changing at really exponential proportions. And there are predictable findings or symptoms that some people will manifest. Obviously, as I say, everybody who smokes doesn't get lung cancer. We are all exposed to electromagnetic radiation, and we're humans, we're individuals, so we respond in different ways, just like we respond to different neurofeedback protocols and training protocols. So we are saturated. And I don't know if my mouse is moving. If we see the mouse, I may use that sometimes. If it's not there, then
it's there.
It is, thank you. Okay, then we're going to talk briefly about screens, the whole aspect of what's called HEV, high energy visible light. Screens, it's a big deal, it's real, it's been there a long time. It's poo-pooed by many, but it is a big deal. And so even looking at screens, if anybody's on screens more than maybe an hour a day, please raise your hand. Like, who isn't? Including kids preschool, in school, And so there's very simple measures to take that I do to minimize the risk of high energy visible light, which is processed in the eye, into the brain, and has effects. And then we'll talk a little bit about social media, not the full outline of, not the full purpose of the talk, but social media is a big deal. And I will try to link you up with resources that when you have time, hopefully you will test to see that all the crazy things that I'm telling you seem to be true. Symptoms, brain, body, and behavior. I'll talk about EEG because EEG, the actual EEG acquisition before we do the quantitative analysis, has a significant amount of information, and I'll talk about some of the work I'm doing with that. And then a few solutions. Mostly, first, we need to be aware that there's a problem. If you're living next to Chernobyl and you're not aware there's a problem, and when it melts down, you're still not aware, then you're going to have all kinds of symptoms and not be aware what the problem is. Education is everywhere. It's just looking at the correct sources, and then what things can we do? So what? Without freaking out that this is such a magnitude worldwide problem. What are we going to do about it? It's too much we can't do. So I have a quiz. What's in your experience as clinicians regarding referrals, number of referrals, frequency of visits, and severity of client symptoms? I won't get a response. We're not doing a survey monkey, but have you noticed that your referrals have been decreasing over time? They're not changing, or they're increasing over time? And I'm asking what I would assume is a leading question. I don't know anybody in the field of neuromodulation, you as clinicians, who are less busy, except by choice, who have a longer waiting list. And what I see in every hospital I work at is more sick people that are sicker than ever, and hospitals are fuller and fuller, and they build bigger hospitals and they're immediately full. So why is that? And I think this is a substantial part of answering that picture as we talk about it. So Rob sent this out. Given our increasingly connected world and the amazing joy and productivity this gives us, we're often unaware of the potential adverse effects of living in such a world. And as I say that, this is all scientifically based. I don't get into conspiracy theories. We're not going to talk about all that sorts of stuff, but hopefully what is good information and scientific facts. And I'm biased. I don't know. I admit that. And so obviously biases will come through, but we'll go from there. Awareness of how this is impacting humans as well as every living organism of all ages in all locations is important to providing the best clinical evaluations and neuromodulation strategies for your clients, our clients and patients. And all living organisms is a whole nother discussion. We've known for decades that we're affecting, for example, migratory patterns of mammals. We're seeing vast decrease in the numbers of types of insects, flora and fauna around the world that is directly impacted by our artificial electromagnetic radiation, which didn't just start with cell phones, it goes back before that. We'll review the sources, symptoms, solutions, as I said, related to Wi-Fi radiation, all forms of artificial, environmental, EMR, electromagnetic radiation. After reviewing the sources, I'll discuss what is predictable signs and symptoms of Wi-Fi radiation on the brain, body, and behavior. And if we don't recognize the symptoms, then we won't be able to eliminate or reduce one of the potential causes of a lot of those symptoms. Finish up the discussion with some solutions to implement what I call optimal daily electromagnetic health, the same way we want to have good exercise health and nutritional health and sleep health and all kinds of things, but we don't often think about electromagnetic health. Excuse me. And I hope that will change a lot more, although as we know, research takes sometimes 2 decades to begin to affect at the public level of daily living. So take-home points, tell them at the end what hopefully the take-home points, Wi-Fi radiation, or artificial electromagnetic radiation, AEMR, affects the nervous system. And by the way, our whole bodies are part of the nervous system. So there are effects, but what are those? Wi-Fi radiation contributes to many, perhaps most, that you might see by the end of this presentation, symptoms of mental ill health and neurological dysfunction. And there's a whole bunch of that, and we'll categorize some of those symptoms and how they manifest variably in different people. So is it causative? Is it correlative? Probably a strong combination of both. And I'll present a little bit of the evidence for that, and you can make your own choices. Reducing exposure to Wi-Fi radiation and EMR will reduce and eliminate signs and symptoms. That's kind of a no-brainer, and will improve function and decrease inflammation, which is one of the primary mechanisms. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If this is a problem, how is it manifesting? How is it causing the problems in humans and other species? Wi-Fi radiation, EMR, interferes with responses to neurofeedback and other neuromodulation modalities. And I make even as a physician with the practice with neurofeedback and neuromodulation strategies, I always talked about training versus treatment. Treatment is something I do to somebody. I prescribe a treatment for a seizure medicine or something else. Training is like going to the gym. And I like to feel like in this field, we are training people in and training our bodies, and our brains respond to that when we get the right feedback. And it's a bit of a gap, Rob. I think you sent out an email yesterday. I don't know if it went to this listserv, but there's periodically media press will pop up with dangers of neurofeedback and how many people have been harmed by neurofeedback, and which I guess I think of neurofeedback and neuromodulation is kind of like exercise when it's done carefully. If you go and get a coach at a gym and you start doing things and that coach doesn't ask you and find out that you already have a dilated cardiomyopathy and you have a near herniated disc, well, if you go through an exercise program, you're going to have injury. The exercise to me isn't the primary problem, but we have to look at those things, especially with the press questioning often, and the healthcare profession questioning what we do as clinicians providing neuromodulation. So those are the take-home points. I always do a quick gratitude moment and 2 slides. One is to the 40 years of patients and families that have taught me so much. My direct mentors through the years, and all these, I'm not being gender biased, these just happen to be the mentors that were part of my training, and all of them have left us, and but they dramatically influenced who I am today. All of these people did. As a healthcare provider, along with in the next slide, you'll recognize a lot of familiar faces, but immense gratitude to what's gone on in my life in multiple dimensions, and just how quickly things are changing. I don't want to forget from history that we can learn so much from history. We have incredible people. My journey started with Barry Sturman, Joel Camilla, back with a course years ago. Cindy Kirshman was there, Jay. Of course, Barry we lost in December. Joel, that many of you know, Joe Lubar, is currently, he's home on hospice and probably just has a very, very short time with us. So amazing people influencing our lives. We lost in this last year Sue Othmer and Les Femi. Len Oakes. Well, we lost Les Femi as well previously, and Michael Thompson. Just amazing. We have an amazing field to be in this healthcare field. So I won't go into that, or that would take an hour and a half itself. So back to, let's talk about the sources. We are saturated with electromagnetic radiation. This one I took off of Mike Cohen's website, who has a lot of good practical things. I make a link to some various things at the end, and I assume once I provide, the slides will be made available, and they should have active links and with good stuff. And this is one of those typical rent a picture or whatever, and it's okay. It gives you the idea that this is everywhere, but it doesn't give the full picture. It gives, like the phone over this urogenital area of this gentleman where we do a lot of our technology, but it shows the waves going up or going away. It's not. It's four-dimensional. It's all dimensions in time that we're exposed to. We're literally saturated, and we have to understand what that means. It's not going to go away, and how do we make it safer? My premise is we are electromagnetic beings living in an electromagnetic world that is increasingly electromagnetically toxic by our human-created electromagnetic fields, which are incredible, as I said. They give us so much. But our brains, and these are approximate numbers, you can find critique and criticism with them, but the 100 billion neurons, the billion neurons in the spinal cord, neurocardiology, the neurons in our cardiovascular system, our gut, 5 million neurons, our urogenital systems, millions of neurons, and we use all of our electronics primarily in this central midline axis where all of our electromagnetic organs are living. And that's important. The slides are busy, and that's just because I do it that way. So hopefully I see everything I'm supposed to say. But sources are everywhere, and they're not changing. Cell towers are obviously dramatically increasing with 5G and ultimately the installation of 6G. What this doesn't include is the space race. And so the 10 to 12,000 satellites, which are now circulating, and the competition with SpaceX and all these other companies, it's one of the biggest areas of competition right now for money and implementation, and it's everywhere. So how do we do this without feeling like we're in a science fiction movie with a horrible ending, or there's nothing we can do? And then I'll have a link to, just as we become aware of what does it look like with the rollout eventually of 6G and how that takes us to new areas. And it's not just about the mobile phone. That's probably the most prevalent thing. How many billions of people have phones and access across the world of our population? So it's unprecedented. But it goes back to things like basic light bulbs and dirty electricity and power lines, which we've known about for years. If you live near the high power lines, that's a problem. Television, screens, so it's everywhere. So instead of going crazy, let's figure out what we can do. I won't detail too much on the differential between what's called the higher frequency and so extra low frequency radiation, and how those apply in different ways. This is kind of our wireless world in this up to the kilohertz and gigahertz range, and what that looks like. And then low power lines, electrical appliances, smart homes, and things that we have now in our homes, boosters and stuff like that. And remembering smart meters, which is a very significant thing clinically in some people's lives, depending where their bedrooms are with regard to the smart meter. This is a graphic taken from a medical conference called EMF Medical Conference a couple of years ago from either Magda Havis or Deborah Davis, who I borrowed this from. But electrosmog, it didn't just start with cell phones, it's been going back, and this is influencing us. I'll make a couple recommendations if you want to take the deep dive and find yourself deeper and deeper in the matrix. It's a pretty big deal. And it's wonderful. I love this slide. I use a lot from NASA because I think they provide excellent graphics. This one just shows as we move further down, so to speak, in the frequency, the crucial thing with electromagnetic radiation is frequency, wavelength, and energy. And they don't obviously have energy on here, but the further we go from direct current down to gamma radiation things, we absolutely increase the frequency of the waveforms. The wavelengths become shorter and shorter, and with that, the energy gets more and more powerful. That's why it's preferable not to hang around if you see one of these gamma warnings. But as we move further and further down into 5G, into the gigahertz range, and then ultimately into 6G, none of these have gone away. Second, third, fourth generation still exists, and they're having effects. But the incredible speed that this provides us comes at a cost. So when you have faster and faster frequencies at shorter and shorter wavelengths with higher and higher energy, they penetrate further into us. That's why if you see this little figure, like we all go to the airport, they don't call them X-ray scanners anymore. They call them what, scanners. You walk through the scanner. We don't call it the X-ray machine because that doesn't sound right. But you probably wouldn't want to stand in a millimeter scanner. That's millimeter waves, which is what 5G is. And but that's kind of what we're exposed to more and more when we're saturated in a 5G environment. We've kind of surpassed microwave, although we still use them. Microwave technology tends to be in 2.5 to 3 gigahertz range. And I would always tell kids, you know, do you want to stick your head in a microwave? I'm like, no, doc, that's stupid. Well, look what we're doing with all our technology around us. And we want to think about how do we, as Rob hinted to, how do we safely keep electronics at a distance and still usable? So as we move down, we're heading down the scale. This is just a sample of how things have changed just even in a little over 20 years from a Wi-Fi map in early 2000s. This one I just took off yesterday from one of the websites where they track Wi-Fi, and our world is changing. And it's clearly regional, but with the advent of what's going on with satellites, it's really literally a whole world thing, which is incredible for connectivity, but it comes at a cost. This is taken from Verizon, so I've tried to give credit. When you look at 4G, 5G saturation coverage, a lot of coverage. And so it's here. What do we do about it? This is, again, just a quick thing. There's an amazing colleague that I get to collaborate with. It's been developing software where you can simply plug in either waveform or wavelength frequency or gigahertz frequency and so on, and you get the energy. The big thing is the higher we go up, the deeper the energy, the more penetration. We live in an incredibly miraculous world that's kept us protected, but there's this gap that has existed. It has nothing to do with the word finding difficulties, but the ozone layer and how that's been affected. There's just this natural gap in our stratosphere, troposphere that's not protected, but there wasn't a lot coming from space related to that until now. All of our technology, a lot of it really good, operates in this wavelength. And as we get more and more satellites that are transmitting back and forth, we're sitting ducks, so to speak, not to pick on ducks in person, but this is all very practical. And there's ways we need to be aware how to use this technology and to be protective of it. So I won't go into this. I have a link to this safer EMR, which is a colleague, a researcher I get to interact with who's extraordinary, who keeps this literature. If you want to be overwhelmed, the literature, the preponderance of research published since at least the 90s, and I'll talk about some important things right prior to the 90s after the Chernobyl disaster, have found significant effects from exposure to radio frequency radiation as well as artificial electromagnetic radiation, so-called extra low frequency or extremely low frequency, such as we have in our homes, and then static EMF, the things that surround us from a man-made standpoint. This found that exposure to these frequencies produces oxidative effects of free radicals and damages to DNA. We kind of know that, like, oh yeah, if you hang around radiation, you might have a risk of damaging your DNA and you might be at risk for cancer, but there's far more going on than cancer. These are just a quick overview. Every phone that we have, every device talks about something called SAR, specific absorption rate. You won't see it. It's not easy to find. You have to go under the legal and regulatory tabs in your phone or iPad or other device to find out. And now they've changed it. It used to be about a 20-page document if you printed it out saying, this is why you shouldn't, and all phones said this, whether it's done Apple or other technologies, is do not carry a phone closer than 8 to 9 millimeters close to your ear, which we don't do. And of course, every time we update our phone, we sign off that this is okay, we understand what they just told us. But this thing called specific absorption rate is not a new description. It's done in physics, environmental research, how much is absorbed. And so this demonstrates specific absorption rate in adult and pediatric brains, either from devices used on the side of our head, which includes Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, AirPods, all those kinds of things. So I always encourage people as a takeaway, if every time you can, use wired devices, not wireless, unless you want to just keep carrying an antenna on your head 24/7, or as long as you're using it. This is from a screen in front, and the absorption that goes into an adult and pediatric brain. Obviously, the young brain with the thinner skull and the more developing brain is more susceptible to radiation effects. I won't touch on that very extensively. Another way to look at it, again, a different view, this is from Environmental Health Trust research, specific absorption rate with a phone or a Bluetooth or AirPod or whatever on our head. And it's absorbed. If we do that all the time, we are electromagnetic beings, our brain electromagnetic, that's going to have predictable effects, sometimes short-term, eventually long-term. Same thing looking from a tablet device, specific absorption rate, and held at 16 inches, and what gets absorbed into the face, eyes, brain, so on. So this is real stuff. It's there. And then the notorious laptop, or when we're using our phones or tablets, most of it, it's in our lap, along our very electromagnetic gut and genital urinary systems. I think the evidence points clearly to at least that being one of the significant reasons for, I've heard as high as 1 in 6 couples are now infertile on both the part of the male and female. So a lot's going on there. So if we're not aware, this is the absorption. Being a pediatric practitioner, this is not new. This was published 20 years ago in Pediatric, which is the premier world pediatric journal. Sensitivity of children to electromagnetic fields. Very well done paper. They quoted what was called the precautionary principle. And if there's some doubt that something is safe, maybe we should be careful about doing it and using it, particularly in younger age groups. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has implemented no screens under age 5, or no more than 1 hour a day, and 1 hour beyond that with school. How do we do that with not even with COVID, but prior to COVID, with all the stuff that we face with? So how do we can't live with 1 hour. If anybody's only on a screen or a device 1 hour a day in this audience, I would love to hear from you and how you do that. It's pretty challenging. We all are. The research is out there years ago. It's 2011 and before. IARC showed that smart boards and other electronic devices were considered level 2B carcinogens, possible human carcinogens. And again, there's far much more than just cancer that we're looking at with this. So it's a big deal. One of the links I point people to is called Baby Safe Project, and that'll be in the resources later. But when we think of how our generation, this last generation, or our generation, mine goes back to the 1950s, so been around a long time, but now we are saturated, and we think of the penetration with pregnant moms and dads, because the infertility is an issue with both, but during this incredible miracle of neurodevelopment and development of the developing baby is affected as all of this synaptogenesis and the myelination and the development of the synapses. It's huge, and we're being exposed now early on. And some of the stuff I presented at the World Congress of Neurology earlier this year, and the International League Against Epilepsy last year in Switzerland, we are seeing not only more genetic problems in children, but more and more neurological problems, and particularly for me as an epileptologist, more and more kids with seizures, and across the age span. So anyway, so I'm always trying to encourage people, think about that. So that's kind of the saturation, and then we'll move on. Social media. This isn't a social media discussion, but I do want to point out, and this is available, I make the link available, but you can find this on the Surgeon General's advisory. And I feel like this is probably more important than the 1964 Surgeon General warning that told us, go guess what, smoking is not good for you. And here we are decades later, wondering how that's really impacted us overall as humans. But there are ample indicators. I mean, it's better on this slide. They said, we cannot conclude that social media is sufficiently safe for children and adolescents, and outlines immediate steps we can take to mitigate the risk of harm to children, adolescents. I encourage you, if you haven't seen this, it's only a 20+ page read. It's easy, it's a free download. I encourage all families to get it. I'm just talking about the whole social media aspect. It's not even talking about the blue light aspect from screens and things like that. So, but they have to warn now because it contains references to self-harm and suicide. Anybody been seeing people with suicidal ideations? It's like there's a lot going on. Is social media the only problem? No, but it's a big part. So that's why I talk about this, and you can, this was just released a few months ago, this booklet. Again, but we have a pattern, I think, that I've seen in myself as well. We don't often listen to history. We look at now we look back and look at the radio watch painters, and we look at smoking, and we go, how could they have been so foolish to think this stuff was safe and publish scientific articles that it was safe? And yet here we are today. So that's my bit on social media. If you get time, please spend time on that. It's absolutely worth it. Screens, the whole thing that Rob talked about, light. We have. I didn't put. This is a whole nother talk in itself, but don't go to the light. 100 years ago, when electric television was, I guess, officially invented in 1927, we changed our human patterns as a species and started staring at a light source. Before that, we didn't stare at light, as far as I'm aware. Don't go to the light, but light's used to illuminate our environment and shine light on things. But we started at a source of light, obviously the television from the 20s, and what we're looking at now with the pixelation and invasiveness of light energy. There's a big reason that the ophthalmologic, particularly the optometrist organizations, are alerting us to the problems. Light is processed. And this is a link to the American Museum of National History. It's a great thing to show patients, your kids, adults. Light is processed where? Through the eye into the brain. Why are we seeing more macular degeneration in younger and younger people, and other eye-related problems, cataracts, but the brain issues, and what does that look like? And this whole thing of the blue light, 400 to 450 nanometer, it's an easy thing to minimize just by using the thing called f.lux, which is a free download for computers. Phones have it. Apple brought it in as something called Night Shift in 2017. They took the technology from f.lux, but they say turn it on at night for a better night's sleep, which is kind of like putting on sunscreen at 2 in the afternoon. It's like there's ways. So not all blue light is bad. We need light. Visible light is a good thing. But the blue light effect, so-called, is really violet. It's more the violet. We know ultraviolet is not really very good for us in an unprotected sense. That's why we have ultraviolet sunglasses now all the time. And so this is an issue. It's easy to wear screen glasses that are cheap. You can get it for 10 bucks on Amazon and use screen protection. And why that's important, not just for eye health, but for brain health. Related to that, somewhat with social media, there's 2 recommendations, and I have these again at the end. If anybody has any clients that have dysregulated mood, impaired cognition, and dysfunctional behavior, all raise your hand if that's an issue. One of the things that we are unaware of is called electronic screen syndrome. This is not an endorsement. I don't have anything to do with her book. Dr. Victoria Dunkley is a child psychiatrist in California. Her website has wonderful resources. There's a couple links to TV coverage that she's done showing where this problem is exhibiting meltdowns, all the stuff that's happening. And this has been known for years, but how do we safely intervene? So that is a bit of a detailed read. It's excellent. I also encourage Mari Swingle. She's now in a 2nd edition called Eye Minds. Initially kind of drawn into it in her field by the gaming addictions. and the time on screen. So that's kind of a big deal as well. I'm looking at the time, Rob. I know I've got just still a few more minutes, so I will keep moving on and keep the fire going.
Okay,
So,
good.
okay, thank you. So what do symptoms look like? If this hype, all this stuff is something, what does it look like? I won't go into detail, but there's a difference between toxin and a toxicant. Toxins, in the technical scientific term, are natural substances which can produce toxicity, such as botulism, and toxicant is something which is human-derived, chemical or physical substance that can injure or destroy or kill an organism anywhere in nature. And electromagnetic radiation is a physical, but it also produces chemical issues. And of course, we know about pesticides and fertilizers and all those kinds of things. So a toxicant, that's all. But toxins produce a lot of different symptoms. It's not like they produce it in one particular part of the body. So when I show you the symptom lists here coming up, then it kind of makes sense that toxins can manifest in multiple systems at different times in different people. So there's no like one thing that says, oh yeah, here's a toxin. This is a little bit of a modification of the slide I showed. Again, we're electromagnetic beams. We do this EEG stuff, and we do any place there's a current, there's a magnetic field. That's why we do our tests that we do: electroencephalography, magnetic resonance imaging, magnetoencephalography, electrocardiogram, electromyogram, oculogram, retinogram. We are electromagnetic beings, and this is important, and we're having effects. So this is a busy slide, and I will just do a quick overview, and I would encourage you to go back and spend some time. And I borrowed this from the National Cancer Institute and cancer.net, two of, I think, one of the best resources for looking at what are the known side effects of radiation. Does everybody have all of these? Of course not. Do they have many of them? Yes, but if you don't recognize this as being an issue related to the radiation, what are we going to do? And obviously, radiation therapy is a very different can of worms or different being that we're dealing with compared to electromagnetic radiation along that spectrum. But it's still in the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, and plus we are getting it. We're not getting targeted radiation therapy for treatments for a short period of time over a targeted cancer or something. But basically, radiation therapy, and this is again from their website, is used to destroy cancer cells. Oops, in the process, side effects come from damage to healthy cells and tissues near the treatment area. The problem that we face with electromagnetic radiation, other than we're using devices over our midline, usually on the front of our bodies or sides of our heads, it's not a targeted area, particularly when we are in a saturated wireless environment. And the signs are predictable. So I've deliberately chosen this slide, except for the long-term effects, which are well known with radiation, and the symptoms of known Wi-Fi and electromagnetic side effects. And I throw in a couple of the graphics that people have on the website, which are very helpful, but people tend to kind of, oh, that's just too comic-y looking, you can't take that seriously. But you'll notice the categories are all done in the same order that I like to order things in or medically, but the symptoms are amazing and scary and all over the place. But sleep, anxiety, but they center around language, memory, and cognitive issues. And again, if we're not aware and we help our clients with neuromodulation, that will help. But if they keep smoking, so to speak, if they don't eliminate what some of the triggers are and they're not aware of that from screens, from wireless and things, then people will get better, but we're not ultimately looking at a cure. So this is a busy but an organized slide of what effects are, and it doesn't all happen at once. It's cumulative, and we're being exposed cumulatively. This kind of ties back to the dysregulated mood, impaired cognition, dysfunctional behaviors that I talked about a little bit ago with electronic screen syndrome, and then some of the things that I see more and more as a neurologist that are at least in part related to electromagnetic radiation, environmental wireless and things, including sudden cardiac death. We hear stories of otherwise healthy athletes suddenly dropping from a sudden heart attack, dying. There's reasons for that. And I think this is one of the bigger reasons that we need to be looking at. This is a whole wonderful in-depth, which I'm not going to do. These radiation has a biological effect. That's how we know it produces it on cancer cells, but also healthy tissues. And it's all been documented. There's plenty of literature. It has a mechanism, oxidative stress. That's why I believe we're seeing so many more mitochondrial manifestations of dysfunction in the EEG. It, of course, affects myelination, particularly in the developing baby, but through our age as well, developmental anomalies. There's all kinds of neuroanatomical, there's well-reported issues going on with hippocampal abnormalities, tying in with memory, language, seizures, and so on. Neuroinflammation is obviously, if people get radiation, you get inflammation. The body's trying to respond to that. And cell death has been reported, neurotransmitter alterations, because that's an electromagnetic process, not just a chemical process. So all of these are just things that have been reported in the literature, substantial literature, thousands, anyway, so that's all there. Blood-brain barrier is one of the biggest ones. Looking at the time, Rob, thank you. But neuroinflammation is a big deal. What does that look like in the EEG? What does that look like in clinical? Because often it's not going to get picked up even in MRI if somebody has that done. We know at least some of the mechanisms of electromagnetic radiation affecting down to the cellular and subcellular level and what that looks like, and then what that manifests like. This is just a quick list. If you get bored, the links are active for blood-brain barrier effects from electromagnetic radiation. When we're in a 5G environment, this is put into the system at 3 gigahertz. There's a 6 millimeter penetration of electromagnetic radiation when we're in a 5G environment. So that's pretty deep when you look at how far that goes into us as our brains, spinal cord, organ systems. So the EEG is electromagnetic, and our brains are electromagnetic, so they're going to be affected by any electromagnetic field. We are created as electromagnetic beings living in electromagnetic universe, as I said. The EEG changes is a whole nother talk. I'll hit that really briefly because more of that's coming this year. And I take all the credit going back to the amazing literature that started being published shortly after the Chernobyl disaster. They tracked the survivors and all the cleanup workers called liquidators, and they've done it for decades. Neuropsychological, psychiatric, EEG data, and it's predictable what happens when a brain has been exposed over time to radiation. And so a lot of these changes are being seen. We'll talk about the solution in just a minute. So EEG is a conglomeration of factors, epigenetic, environmental, and so I love EEG. What's kind of appalling is how little literature there is dealing with direct EEG effects. And you can find papers that saying a mobile phone has no effects on the brain. And people do a short-term study, which to me is like saying they had somebody smoke 10 packs a day for 3 months and they didn't get lung cancer. So therefore smoking didn't have an effect. I think sometimes the science is lacking. These are things we'll talk more of in the future. Predictable EEG effects, which are showing up more and more, not in everybody, but in certain individuals. Increased beta, pathological beta, slowing of the posterior dominant rhythm, probably due to mitochondrial drain and lower power EEG. And that's well productive. This I took initially from the Chernobyl literature, which unfortunately, because it came out of Russia and the Ukraine, has not been published in most American journals because we've tended to kind of, discriminate. Focal slowing, particularly over the left, is well reported. And I would love to show slides, I'm not going to do that. But also the development of epileptiform discharges. A seizure just doesn't start one day. The seizure process begins in somebody who eventually develops seizures, and that can be seen post-radiation. So that's a big deal. That's why I love this field and getting to look at EEGs with people, because you're going to be screening people who are going to have EEG abnormalities that give you a clue what's going on in their life and things you can do to help their EEG get better. And then the biggest issue is affecting sleep and circadian rhythms. So I call that the basics. I just made up a new acronym, more on that later, that how EEG changes eyes open, eyes closed. So last thing, Rob, I know I'm late. Etiologic factors, neurotoxicants, in this case, electromagnetic radiation, Wi-Fi, wireless radiation, unknowingly slow or inhibit disease recovery and progress with health interventions. Is anybody in this audience trying to produce health interventions? Or are we trying to promote disease? Of course, we're trying to promote health. We're not just trying to be disease managers. And if we gear our treatment protocols just to symptom suppression without looking at the cause of those symptoms, in some ways that sometimes isn't a lot different than going to a healthcare prescriber who sees a symptom. As I say, it's like prescribing an antipyretic for somebody with meningitis. Well, we're going to bring your fever down. What caused the fever? So we got to look at those big picture. As I said, our nervous system is essentially electromagnetic and the neurochemistry is secondary. And we've all seen that as the brain gets healthier in regulation, people will often require less pharmaceutical intervention because the body's beginning to reproduce its own miraculous inherent pharmacy. So what do we do about this? Dr. Becker he was nominated but never got the Nobel Prize. In the 1970s, he said, as a physician who developed electromagnetic, pulsed electromagnetic for bone healing, I have no doubt in my mind that at the present time, written in the 70s, the greatest polluting element in the Earth's environment is the proliferation of electromagnetic fields. And so on this slide, I should save more time to go over it, but it's just start simple. You don't have to go crazy. Distance is the main thing. When I don't have my phone with me, it's sitting right now about 2 feet in front of me. I try to always use Ethernet cord or wired connections whenever I can instead of Wi-Fi. Knowing how to turn off your Wi-Fi, realizing a cell phone has at least 4 different waveform generators, wireless frequency generators, so going on airplane mode doesn't eliminate the problem. How do we make our bedrooms what I call a sleep sanctuary? And I have some links to that at the end. How do we be more mindful, try to do what humans used to do before with meditation, breath work, more water outside, natural light, things like that. And little things that are getting to be more common sense, but it's just hard to do, to look at how do we get healthy, restorative sleep. So the links at the end, these are just pictures of some of the books that I would highly recommend. It's sort of like drinking out of the fire hydrant. But any of these things, Reset Your Child's Brain, that's by Dr. Dunkley. iMinds by Dr. Mari Swingle. Invisible Rainbow, that is a absolute game paradigm shifting book that you will not feel good after reading, but Dr. Arthur Furstenberg has done his homework. It's called The History of Electricity and Life. It goes all the way back to the development of electricity. Cross Currents is one of Dr. Becker's books, goes back 20 years, or actually 25 years plus. The Perils of Electropollution, Promise of Electromedicine. This is, I think, available for 4 days of incredible teaching. And I wasn't part of this, so I don't get any finances from it, but the Electromagnetic Field, the EMF Medical Conference 2021. It's a superb resource. I mentioned the Surgeon General's warning about social media. And then there's incredible websites and people that keep up. If you want to find out more about how to easily, free, and cheap make a sleep sanctuary, the Building Biology Institute has that little handout called Creating a Sleep Sanctuary that I talked about, and others. I've been privileged to be part of this Physicians for Safe Technology, incredible clinicians looking at health worldwide, Parents for Safe Technology. Environmental Health Trust is one of the best resources. It's an international, it's based out of the UK. And I think, in my own opinion, these are excellent, and they're not funded by external organizations or telehealth or telecommunications industries. There's some of the books that are available. And mechanisms we won't go over. So the conclusions are there. I've gone way over, Rob. So guess what? I do that a lot. So thank you very much.
You know, Rusty, so much great information. I know you've got to go. Quick question. So if you're near cell phone towers, you're still getting exposed to all that from the towers themselves, I would imagine, right? Radio towers, cell phone towers?
Yep. And again, distance is your friend. And so we have towers because they're going up everywhere, these massive towers. And one of the links I put in, which I think is helpful to read, although it's a little bit Eeyore in its approach, is on a website called Aries Tech. And I have the link there, ariestech.com, but
Right.
it's
Yep.
6G, and they've got pictures. So how do we operate safely? Distance is your friend. How do you, I wouldn't want to live as close as we're being forced to at some point. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, the reason I was asking is my father's assisted living program, and there's a cell tower right outside the building. It's got to be problematic for everybody there.
And on the roofs of most major office buildings, hotels, I mean,
Yep.
it's all there. And again, we're not always aware of it. People who lived by Chernobyl for years, even during the progressive time of the meltdown or Fukuyama or other places, aren't always aware of things. But it's there slowly but surely.
All right. Well, I know you've got, yeah, I know you've got a 1 o'clock meeting, folks. If you have questions for Dr. Turner, email them directly to me. I will forward those to Dr. Turner, and if they're simple enough, he can write back responses, and I'll post it, or he will on the listserv. Rusty, thank you. Incredibly powerful, interesting information, lots to absorb, and we appreciate so much you taking the time today to do this with us. Just very fascinating and important information.
Thanks. I hope it wasn't too much, but thank you. And
No,
there's a lot
nope. Could have gone
easy
another hour as far as I'm concerned. It was great.
more to come. Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks so much.